Hello everyone and welcome to the channel that takes you to the zoo. As always and forever, my name is Zach and I will be your tour guide. Before you say anything, I know what you're thinking. Where did I get this awesome shirt? Well, I actually teamed up with the Landmark Project, an educational initiative that makes sustainable materials and then uses the funds to save wild things and wild places like national parks. So if you would like to help out by buying a shirt or a couple of socks, you can go to the referral link below and use the promo code ZOOTOURS to see what kind of discount we can get you. Today we're going to be doing something a little different. Rather than going through one part of a zoo to learn about its animals, it is my job to get you prepared for your visit to the Minnesota Zoo if you ever decide to go. For families, I'll talk about how much you might have to spend, how much you might have to walk, and how long you'll be there. And for both families and zoo enthusiasts, I'll go through each section one by one to point out everything that you can and should not miss. So, with that taken care of, let's get to the basics. The Minnesota Zoo opened in 1978. Now for those born in the late 70s, good news for you because that's actually considered relatively young in the zoo world, especially when you compare it to some zoos that are over 100 to 150 years old. So much of what you'll actually see today opened with the zoo and has had minimal changes. The grounds cover 485 acres, putting it among some of the largest walk-through zoos in the nation. Occasionally, when a zoo is this big, it has a lot of undeveloped land, and that's true for Minnesota. But you're definitely best still bringing your greatest pair of walking shoes, and you'll see why if you continue watching. For now, I will say there's a great chance that your visit will last from open to close, which is 10 to 6 p.m. during the busy season and 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. during the off-season. Which brings me to my next point. Some zoos just are not worth visiting in the off-season because usually it's too cold for the animals to be outside or even visible at all. And Minnesota has some unforgiving winters. However, it's one of a handful of zoos in the US where you can still see nearly every single species no matter the time of year, because most of the warm, only tolerant species are inside year-round. And nearly every species that you do see outside can tolerate the warmth and the cold weather. I visited in September and another time in October, and even though it was borderline freezing, I would choose to go back in October every time. Mostly because the nature up here is gorgeous this time of year. But just a heads up, once December rolls around, some areas are closed for a few months, but honestly, it's nothing that you wouldn't miss, in my opinion. So we covered how much you might donate your time to the zoo. Now, as for how much you're going to donate your wallet to the zoo, admission as of 2025 is $17.95 for children, $23.95 for adults, $21.95 for seniors, and you can get your children in for free if they are 2 and younger. And parking is $10. So is it worth the price tag? Well, that's for you to decide based on what you'll see today, or you can just wait till the very end to hear what I have to say. There are 4 main parking lots and 2 entrances. I recommend getting as close as you can to the Camel parking lot and walk through the south entrance. That way you can go to the restroom, grab a snack, grab a souvenir, and explore the zoo's first 4 main exhibits without ever having to actually step a foot under the sun. If you take a right in the main center, that'll put you in between penguins of the African coast and a wild bunch of Japanese macaques. Now if you go even further right, you'll start to feel the heat and the humidity from the Tropics Trail, one of America's first and few large indoor rainforests, representing the canopies and ground floors of Africa's, Asia's, and South America's tropics. The trail takes you on a winding 1.5-acre journey past over 150 unique species along the way. From lemurs of Madagascar, fruit bats that live right behind intimidating dwarf crocodiles. Flamingos are essentially in the same space as singing gibbons. You'll run into the king of the lizards, some of the Earth's most magnificent birds, and even get really close to the Malayan tapir. And though it's not as diverse as it used to be, there's also a small, dark corner for a nocturnal sloth and a large snake. all while trekking different levels of the forest from beginning to end. But what really sets this apart from the country's other amazing indoor rainforests? The others can't say. They have a section dedicated to tropical waters with an 80,000-gallon coral reef, teeming with life from the Indian Ocean, and reminding visitors that there are different kinds of forests below the surface. Where one journey ends, another begins almost immediately. You'll feel the tropical humidity one moment, and then feel the warmth of a cozy cabin in the next. This is your gateway to the Minnesota Trail, a celebration of the state's most beloved and mostly unseen critters, some that still call the Minnesota wilderness home, and others that used to call it home. The trail literally puts you in between their habitats, so almost the entire way, there's a species on your left and a different one on your right. And while the entire time you get to observe these amazing animals from under a shelter, nearly every species is actually outside. There's playful otters, an elusive lynx, close encounters with wolves and coyotes, and nearly 40 other species. And the absolute cannot misses are the mighty tough wolverines and the American marten, the first and only time I've ever seen one. And it gave me the perfect first impression. From experience, some of these critters are historically, let's say, well rested and therefore well hidden most of the day, like the American porcupine, bears, and especially the beavers. But you can feel like Snow White if you get here really early after the gates open. But you know what's always on the move, really no matter what time you see them? Sea creatures. The Discovery Bay is one of a handful of aquariums found inside a zoo, and it's also one of the largest, flowing 1.1 million gallons of saltwater, which is more than some city aquariums. One corner highlights small creatures that turns finding them into a fun challenge, like garden eels, seahorses, and baby sharks, while another part of the building has the animals coming right to you. The most popular features are the hands-on interactive stations. You can put your hands in the water and pet bat rays and leopard sharks in one tank, and sea anemones and sea stars in another, while also feeling the surge from timed waves. You can also participate in the virtual restaurant and learn about the importance of sustainable seafood to make sure that fish populations in the oceans stay healthy. The largest feature, though, is the aquarium's own amphitheater, which was home to dolphin presentations off and on and off again for many years. I haven't had any luck seeing the theater myself since it was closed, but you can still see the recently welcomed California sea lions below the surface. You should also be on the outlook for their monk seal. I hear that she rotates with the sea lions, though I don't know the schedule, unfortunately. And the last time I saw her was in 2021. But of course, you can always ask a zoo employee when and how you can see this pinniped that's both very rare in zoos and in the wild. And that will finally take us outside to experience Russia's Grizzly Coast, that transports you to the rugged landscapes of Russia's Far East, a region flourishing with diverse wildlife and breathtaking scenery, both in the wild and Minnesota Zoo's recreation. The path brings you as close as it possibly can to brown bears, irresistibly adorable sea otters, one of the world's most endangered cats, and a Hungarian breed of domestic pig. In place, of course, for the phased-out European wild boars. Their signage was still there when I went a few months ago, so because of that, some of us are still hopeful for their return. What's just as impressive as the animals is the man-made ambiance. You can hear the sounds of the sea, discover creatures and objects that have been washed ashore. There's volcanic activity in more ways than one, and I love an exhibit that informs the public about certain parts of the world's ecosystems just as much as it does with their animals. And that's why Russia's Grizzly Coast is often called the Minnesota Zoo's premier exhibit. I would like to point out that the general public says that it's the best, not just because of the animals that it has, not just because of the award-winning constructed ecosystem, but because it's also an easy walk-through attraction, which is in complete contrast to the Northern Trail. starting from the Grizzly Coast's exit to its entrance. The Northern Trail's loop is over half a mile. I know for some that doesn't sound like a lot, but it definitely is for just one zoo exhibit. So it's good for some exercise and for good views of some of the best habitats you'll ever see. The path covers or shows at least 30 acres and features about 12 to 15 species depending on the time of year. So yes, all of these animals have access to large expansive spaces. Some of them are multiple acres themselves. There's herds of bison, pronghorn, toucans, reindeer, some of the nation's few moose in human care. And it begins and ends with massive tigers, which just did make an appearance on my top 10 best tiger exhibits video. And if you click on that card in the corner, you can find out where Minnesota placed. The ground level is over half a mile, but your journey can be even longer. Just recently, the zoo converted their monorail into an elevated footpath that takes you above the Northern Trail and through the untouched nature around the zoo's undeveloped areas, turning that half a mile into nearly a mile-and-a-half walk. My advice with this is, if you're looking to get a cooler perspective of the animals, yeah, I definitely recommend coming up here. But I wouldn't recommend it if you're on a short time limit. But for that reason, there are several points where you can cut this skywalk short. One of them brings you close to the Wells Fargo family farm, a delightful attraction that has the makings and the base of a typical children's zoo, which are usually just large petting zoos. But it is so much more than that. This charming area offers an authentic glimpse of Minnesota's agricultural heritage to connect us visitors with a farm atmosphere. While most of this area does allow you to pet the livestock, they also provide educational insights into life on the farm and really emphasizes the importance of agriculture in our daily lives. I did say the Minnesota Zoo is perfect for fall and winter visits because you can see nearly every animal no matter how cold it is. The family farm is an exception and is closed through the beginning of December through mid-March. And that, folks, will complete my beginner's guide to the Minnesota Zoo, from what I would call a beginner's perspective myself. Now, what I usually do to close out my breakdowns is offer my personal thoughts and opinions. I visited once in 2021, again in 2024, and each time I had a wonderful experience. Absolutely zero complaints whatsoever. My feet would say otherwise, but honestly, that's just a testament to how big some of these living spaces are. Even before I decided to come up here, I knew this place had a reputation for being nearly flawless in many ways. I can say this is one of the few zoos in the nation that doesn't have a downright bad exhibit. Some of them could use either a small facelift or should probably at least display something a little smaller, but there's nothing concerning. I also know that it has a reputation for not developing exhibits quickly compared to other zoos. I know some parks that put something new out every 2 to 3 years, but Minnesota's last truly major animal project, not counting the llama trek, which you can read more about below, was the reimagination of the Minnesota Trail in 2013, and if you don't count that, then I guess you gotta go back to Russia's Grizzly Coast in 2008. Locals will also say that it's notorious for losing species more than it gains, whether that means the population of a herd has gone down drastically or they phase the species out entirely, which isn't always a zoo's choice. Speaking as a non-local who didn't grow up to see these developments, or lack thereof, these outside criticisms did not affect my opinion of this place. When I put it up against the 55 zoos, aquariums, theme parks, and more that I've been to, I would place it around the 15 or 16 mark, and 13 when we're just talking about traditional zoos. But if you said that it belongs in a top 10 spot, I wouldn't even argue with you. The Minnesota Zoo is still objectively great for both visitors and its residents. It's educational, the people are really friendly, the surrounding nature is gorgeous. It's definitely more than worth its admission in my opinion, and I cannot wait to guide you through this place more in depth on our actual tours. So with that, please stay tuned for our next adventure. Go wild, go have a nice rest of your day, and go make a difference out there.